Hi, I'm Dave Higgins. In this presentation, we're going to talk about portraiture. Hopefully, these techniques will help you get better and more powerful portraits. When I think about portraiture, I usually break it up into two separate categories: public relations and family type images. Now, with the public relation images, you're usually trying to sell a concept or an idea, so you have to approach it a little bit differently. And you'll find that putting the emphasis on the eyes and the hands in a public relations shot is almost an essential. For me, there are basically two different approaches to shooting portraits. One is known from shooting from the inside, and the other is known as shooting from the outside. Now, when you're doing a public relations shot, I almost always shoot from the inside. When you shoot from the inside, you use a wide-angle lens and you move in close so that your point of view appears to be someone who's watching the activity and you are involved in the activity. This helps the viewer feel like that they're participating in whatever's happening in the scene. If the subject is using their hands, then you want to make sure that these hands are included in the image. It will always create a more powerful image, and the viewer will feel more relationship to what's happening in the image. It's critical that you find whatever point of view is going to give you the best shot of what's happening in the image. Now, to get the shot of these two people working on the lathe, I actually had to lay on the floor behind the lathe so that I could see both the eyes and the hands and illustrate the activity. Now, you may have to stand on a table, you may have to stand on a chair or lay on the floor, but you have to find the angle that's going to allow you to see what's happening and also be able to see the eyes of the subject. If you cannot see the eyes, then you must make the hands the central part of the composition and place the emphasis on the product being produced. You may, in some cases, intentionally not want to show the eyes because you do want to make the product the more important part of the image. So it's a decision you need to make. Is it going to be about the eyes or is it going to be about the hands? And if it's going to be about the hands, it has to be about the product. You need to always remember that your camera has two formats, and you need to make sure that you're using the format that most appropriately matches what you're trying to say with the scene. Now, in the case of the man working on the bowl, I wanted to make the bowl the emphasis, so I wanted this long shot and have the bowl be in the bottom. In the shot of the boy, I wanted his eyes to be the emphasis, and he had these elbows sticking out, so I wanted to have the format of the picture fit his pose. So always look at your subject and ask yourself, is this the best format? When you're composing an informal portrait or a family shot, this is usually where I use the other technique, and I shoot from the outside. This means that I would use a longer lens and I would be further away from the subject. And what this will do is it will isolate the subject, and it's easier to put more emphasis on the individual. Most of the time, the hands aren't as important as the eyes. So when you're doing portraits and family shots, you always want to be conscious that you can see these eyes. When I photograph a portrait, I put the greatest emphasis on the eyes. I pick a point of view that will allow me to see them. But also, it's very important to try and get as much light in there as possible. The eyes can absorb a tremendous amount of light, and the more light you get into them, the brighter and sharper they'll appear. Anytime you're photographing a person, you always want to try and make sure there's more space in front of them than behind them. And again, the eyes are the trick. Unless the person is looking directly at you, you do not want the eyes in the center of the image. You want them more off to the side and a little higher or a little lower. This is called anticipatory space. The viewer will be much more comfortable if there's space in front of, or more space in front of the subject than behind it. I like simple lighting when you're doing a portrait. I usually use one light and a reflector. and I try and place the light as much to the side or at a right angle to the subject as I can. And what this does is it does two things. It allows the light to get inside the eyes, and it also casts a strong shadow. And you can use this shadow as part of the composition. Now remember, you do have to use a fill card to bounce some light back into the shadow side of the face, or you won't have any detail in that area. So best lighting for me is strong side lighting at a little bit above eye level. A good background can make or break an image. I always try and find a background that is as undistracting as possible. Now, when you're doing this, there's several ways you can do this. You can ask your subjects to move, which then usually breaks the scene and you don't get the image you want. Your best compositional tool are your feet. So what you want to try and do is position yourself in such a way that there's a nice neutral background, usually of a darker value than the flesh tones of the individuals. If you're shooting color, I think the best color you can have is a nice muted green. It really sets off the flesh tones nicely. And there's a lot of green out there. You just have to try and find a way that you can position your subject so green is behind them and preferably out of focus. In most cases, your most powerful portraits are shot eye level to eye level. So if you're shooting somebody shorter than you are, you have to get down to their level. Now this is especially true with children and pets. So if you want to get a really powerful intimate shot of a child, you need to be down at their level. Now occasionally I'll have to shoot somebody that's a lot taller than I am. And what I'll do in that case is I'll ask them to sit in a chair. And then that way I can get their eye level down to my eye level. But unless there's a compelling reason not to do this, you should try and shoot eye level to eye level. Sometimes you can create a more powerful portrait by ignoring that rule and picking an extreme angle, either from way above or below, and you can still get a very interesting portrait. But you have to remember that most of the time eye to eye is going to look best, but you also want to look at what other options you have, because if you can make it so that you break this rule and it's successful, then you will have a portrait that will be more powerful than the normal shot. Whenever I shoot portraits, I shoot as much film as I can, or as many shots as I can. I no longer use film. And then I rely upon Photoshop to help me make the best image. Photoshop is a necessity, in my opinion, to be able to create the really powerful image. You can see here we have the two shots, what came out of the camera, and then how it came out of Photoshop. And you can see how we did a lot of enhancements. Now the reason why I say shoot lots, because sometimes I'll have to take pieces, like I might take an eye out of one image to replace an eye that's not perfect in another. Or if you're shooting a portrait of several people, you may have two good shots of the people but in different images. Then you have to put them together. But remember that Photoshop is the final process of shooting a good portrait. These are some of the things you want to be thinking about when you're creating portraits. I hope that you find this information helpful and that you can produce more powerful portraits using it.